What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Resurrection review. As I said before, the next video in the Halloween-A-Thon 2K19, which is what I'm going to start calling it, is a review of this. Specifically Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein, the original 1931 and 1935 films. Interesting thing here, by the way. I'm reading through Frankenstein over again, and there's a little blurb, not really blurb, essay at the beginning by Stephen King, where Stephen King says that the original Frankenstein came out in 1932. He is wrong, because he does not know movies, he knows books. He's Stephen King. Leave what you want at the door. That doesn't make any sense. What I mean to say is he doesn't know much about movies, knows a lot more about books, and that's fine, he's an author, but whatever. Still drinking out of that same mug, dressed in the same clothes, the same hat. Wonderful stuff. So, I'm going to talk about Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, specifically from the perspective of the Frankenstein monster as fallen man. So, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a concept within theology that men are fallen. Men started out in sort of a somewhat perfect society created by God in the Garden of Eden. This is very basic Bible story stuff. There's the original disc, by the way, original Frankenstein on disc, and Bride of Frankenstein. I also have Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein, as well as, let's see, House of Frankenstein, Dracula and House of Dracula, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. All really fun movies to watch, by the way. So, however, like I was saying, there's this concept that man is fallen. Of course, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Eve is seduced by the serpent. The serpent gets her to eat a specific fruit. We're not exactly sure what it is. It's only called the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, it's actually called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and you're not supposed to eat of the fruit of that tree. Well, Eve, of course, eats of it, and then you've got Adam standing right there with her. He actually takes the brunt of the punishment because, specifically, he is allowing this to happen. He watched it happen, and he's not gonna use his cognitive ability to stop it. So you've got that going on there. Now, the whole idea of the fallen man now means that since we fell as Adam, because Adam fell and because Eve fell, we are all inherently possessing qualities of both good and evil. We always have something there that is bad inside of us. We all have potential for bad, we all have potential for good, but specifically we have some innate negative qualities that we're just sort of born with. This is the theological point of view that I'm going to kind of come from here. Now, where Frankenstein comes in is that, I don't know if you guys know this, but the original novel diverges into a whole bunch of, diverges into a whole lot of philosophical discussion back and forth, where they're talking about, the nature of good and evil, and what it means to play God, and why what Frankenstein is doing is wrong. Sorry, I'm trying to fix the camera a little bit. And in that, you've got this discussion about good and evil. And you've got, of course, the whole novel being about how the Frankenstein monster does become sort of evil over time because of how he was created or how he has been treated, all this different stuff. So, where I'm going to take it is specifically from the movies. Now, the book, of course, a great novel, one of the great horror novels of the 19th century, Mary Shelley, of course, a brilliant writer, wife of Percy Shelley, who was a great poet of the time. He was very well known. She was not. Now she's more well known than Shelley was. So, just kind of how things go. But anyway, we're going to go specifically from the movie because, I mean, it kind of works better with the films as opposed to the novels. And I'm just kind of going to ramble. This isn't incredibly structured. I'm just going to kind of take it from that philosophical idea and talk about these movies in terms of that. So, where we get the whole idea of a fallen man in Frankenstein is that the monster is made in a specific way. Now, of course, you can say that he's immediately evil just because he was made by a man and not by God. I think a lot of people would look at it that way. Or, because he's made by man and not by God, that inherently gives him some negative quality. However, the thing that really makes me think about the negative quality isn't necessarily because he's made by man. It's because he's given a brain that is specifically supposed to be a criminal brain. In the original Frankenstein movie, you may remember this scene. Fritz is breaking into this school, this university of science, and he's going and stealing this brain for Frankenstein to use in the creation of the Frankenstein monster. Well, he's supposed to get a normal brain, but he ends up getting an abnormal brain that we later learn, that we actually have learned at that point, is a criminal brain, a murderer's brain, a man who is involved in violence and brutality throughout his entire life. So Frankenstein inherently has this flaw in him. He's given something wrong with him. And some people might say that every person is sort of given their cross to bear, in that you are all going to be flawed. We're all flawed in some way. The way that Frankenstein is flawed, or Frankenstein's monster is flawed, is that he's got a faulty brain. And so he's sort of predisposed to do violence and predisposed to do this evil because his creator put that in him. Now, he subverts that and does good in his short life, at least between Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. But it's only the outside influences that can help to make the evil that's influencing him inside better. Now, so you've got the faulty brain. Another thing that I want to bring in is this scene in the first Frankenstein when the monster is looking up to the sky. They've kept him in darkness for most of his young life. You know, he's sort of born an adult, kind of like Adam was. But he's sheltered in darkness, whereas Adam was sheltered sort of in this perfect place. Frankenstein's monster is sheltered within darkness, and they don't want to give him light. They don't want to put him in light because they're afraid that it's going to hurt him. That, of course, is different from God's point of view. God wants us to have only light and be looking towards only light, especially in that early stage, in the first few chapters of Genesis. Frankenstein's point of view is that if he has light on him, it's going to disturb him and somehow warp him, or it's going to change him in some way from his pure little form. But by keeping him in darkness, he's immediately abusing him. He's immediately abusing this creation of his. So that alone is enough to change a person if you're kept in darkness your entire life. However, Frankenstein's monster eventually does get to see sunlight while he's still in this dungeon. And he reaches up to the sky, and he's stretching so hard, and he's trying to get this light. And it seems as if he's beckoning God to imbue him with a soul, or he's beckoning the outside force, which would be God, to come in and change who he is as a created being created by a man. So he's trying to get that inherent goodness. He seems to receive it, but only a little bit, and so he's only got a little bit of this goodness inside of him before Frankenstein shuts down that light, shuts the skylight, so that he's not able to get it. And so he's kept in darkness instead. So Frankenstein's monster is inherently a fallen being. He's already got a flaw in him. The outside influence that he's getting only increases that flaw. So where he has a badly developed brain, or a brain that has some problems, it's only making those problems worse, and it in fact makes him into a killer because he's put in an environment where he is not correctly dealt with. He should have been dealt with in love, but because Frankenstein himself knows that what he's done is evil, he doesn't want to try and make that evil better by making his creation into something that could be good for the world. Instead, what he does is simply just let it go. He doesn't want to take responsibility. Later on, he'll want to take responsibility in the movie when he wants to actually get the monster killed. But most of the movie, throughout the first movie and throughout the second movie, he just wants to avoid it. He'd prefer just to have them leave him alone. Dr. Pretorius, in the second movie, in Bride of Frankenstein, instead wants to be proactive and help to foster the growth of this monster, but to an evil degree. He wants to make Frankenstein into an evil person. So where Dr. Frankenstein himself, played by Colin Clive, just wants the monster to leave him alone and just wants the monster sort of pushed away, he's doing something negative, but not from any type of malice. What Pretorius does is he specifically introduces negative stuff into Frankenstein's life. Now, I personally don't think that alcohol is evil or anything like that, but he introduces the monster to alcohol, specifically strong alcohol. We can talk about the hermit scene later, maybe, but what we've got going on with Pretorius is that he's trying to make the Frankenstein monster drunk. He's trying to get him to procreate so that they can create this evil race of people to help control the world. And so the Frankenstein monster himself is he's born with, as I've said, this flaw, but he's at many times a blank slate. You know, the Frankenstein monster is always sort of compared to being a child. You know, he's kind of a child in terms of these monsters. You know, Dracula might be sort of the adult and somewhat sexual. And then the Wolfman is sort of the teenage era where you're kind of learning about sexuality and learning about these urges that could be destructive. But Frankenstein is just sort of all by himself there. He has evil inside of him already, but he could have potential for good because he's received a little bit of that light. And so we have characters that do try to introduce good into his life. For instance, little Maria. And Maria, of course, the little girl that he ends up accidentally drowning, but only because he's ignorant. At that point, he hasn't done anything evil per se. He's just made an awful mistake. But that awful mistake leads other people to turn on him without any type of love or any type of sympathy, because he's made a mistake, and because the people around him specifically are already so flawed, more flawed than he is in fact. they want to make Frankenstein's monster gone. They want to kill him because he made a mistake in his innocence. After that, once they've tried to kill him the first time, he's much more violent in the second movie because he's had all of this negativity sort of thrown at him. You know, he doesn't do a lot of evil in the first probably hour of the original movie. He makes that awful mistake by accidentally drowning this girl. But he hasn't really done anything that evil. He's only sort of reacted to what's been around him. And nobody's done that much evil to him. But in the last 15, 20 minutes of the original Frankenstein, all the people are treating him like crap. And because they treat him like crap, he starts to view the world as worthless. And so he kills multiple people in Bride of Frankenstein. And when Bride of Frankenstein is really to about the halfway point, that's the only time in which he's ever gotten any kind of positivity. He keeps getting all this crap thrown at him and all this stuff. And so he's becoming worse and worse and worse. And that's kind of how we are too as people. You know, if all that we get in our nurturing is negativity, we're going to be negative and we're going to look at the world through a negative point of view. But halfway through The Bride of Frankenstein, he finally finds somebody to treat him well. He finally finds this old hermit who seems to actually be a monk. He's dressed in robes. He's got religious iconography all around him. He's praying. He's indulging in things, but only to a moderate degree. So he's indulging in cigars, and he's indulging in, you know, some kind of light liquor. He's indulging in wine, which is sort of juxtaposed against the gin of Dr. Pretorius. And Pretorius actually uses that in introduction of cigars, which was so positive before, to seduce him into doing evil later. But you've got this good influence in the old hermit who is praying for him, who is being a friend to him, who's teaching him to speak. And in that time, there's no negativity whatsoever for about 5 minutes. And then the world comes crashing in. And I don't know if you guys know this concept either, but the world is kind of, you know, a fallen domain as well. Because humans fell, the world fell as well in this specific theological framework. And because the world has fallen, the world just keeps crashing down and hurting people. And it's only by looking outside the world or looking inside oneself at what is sort of in some way larger than this world, are we able to find truth and goodness. So he's going sort of further inside of humanity, in that he is going to be conversing with this monk who's in the middle of the woods, this hermit. And it's only when the world intrudes on that small space that it finally comes crashing down. But by the end of Bride of Frankenstein, after the world has entirely crashed down on him and he's given some degree of hope from an evil person, Dr. Pretorius, who, by the way, we are somewhat led to believe is a somewhat satanic figure. For instance, Elizabeth, Frankenstein's to-be wife, his betrothed, is talking about this evil, dark shape that she keeps seeing, that is coming after Henry. She keeps seeing visions of this dark shape coming towards Henry Frankenstein. And she says, there it is, and then faints. And at the same time that she faints and starts sort of laughing hysterically, a knock comes at the door. And what do we see? but Pretorius, dressed in all black, very little on his body showing, very little of his countenance showing anything except for black and a death-like face. So you've got sort of this image of Satan that is Pretorius. And Pretorius is a tempter not only of Frankenstein's monster, but Frankenstein himself. He continues to tempt Frankenstein into creating the bride, and the bride is sort of their unholy masterpiece. Pretorius is sort of putting in this black magic combined with Frankenstein's science to create what would be sort of the Eve character, but where Eve was so accepting of Adam and so accepting of all this good, positive stuff, the exact opposite is coming from the Bride of Frankenstein, Elsa Lanchester. Really, really great performance for just a few minutes, but very much sort of the picture of the fall of man in some ways, and sort of a reflection of that concept, because he's got that brain that's messed up. He's got all this stuff happening to him. The world is affecting him in a negative way, and because he's already got that small bit of negativity and that small bit of good, the good is overwhelmed by the negative influence of all these people. So ultimately, what happens, if you guys have seen Bride of Frankenstein, and I think it's okay to spoil it because it's nearly 100 years old at this point, he decides, in order to save Frankenstein himself, in order to save Frankenstein, and in order to put things back right with the world, he decides to commit suicide and destroy this entire castle that's filled with this laboratory equipment, and also has inside of it not just himself, but also Pretorius and the bride. He knows that none of them were meant to... He knows that neither he nor the bride were meant to be in this world. It's not a good idea to play God. It's not a good idea to try and recreate Eden when the recreation of Eden is not possible. It's always going to be flawed because the person that's making it is flawed. Because God wasn't flawed, Eden was perfect until the introduction of evil. And because he's given them free will, that's an entirely different discussion. But when you've got Frankenstein finally deciding to destroy him and his bride, he's also trying to take out I almost said Pistorius, Oscar Pistorius, but Dr. Pretorius. Because he's trying to take out Pretorius, he's also trying to take out the evil that has influenced his life, because Pretorius is the worst of the evil that's influenced him. You've got all these different people, sort of the indifference of Frankenstein himself, and then the evil of these unaccepting, bigoted villagers that just want to destroy him and not give him any type of positive quality. That is only somewhat bad compared to the ideas that Pretorius is trying to give to him. This idea that he can be happy through this black magic ritual, because he's going to get a bride, just because he's going to do what Pretorius says, he's going to be happy. That hurt him more than anything else, because it gave him a chance and then threw it away. And so he's trying to destroy not only himself and his bride, but also Pretorius, because Pretorius is the worst of the worst. So really, I guess I was going to talk about it in terms of the fall of man and in terms of men being flawed. And that's what I've talked about. I've talked about that, but at the same time, I've kind of talked about how the nurturing of an individual, having been already fallen, can make or break that person, in terms of how they act within this world. And ultimately, Frankenstein's goodness shines through because he knows that what's happened should have never happened. And so he's going to try to set things right. His last good act is actually destruction, which is really sad because it forces him, a being that ultimately does have good in him, using the only good that he has, to use the evil that he has inside of him to destroy himself, this other creation, the bride, which could have possibly been even worse than he was, hurt even more than he was, and in some ways more powerful because of her femininity. Because of that, she could have been worse. And then, of course, destroying Pretorius because he's trying to do all this evil stuff and make what Frankenstein made even more destructive. And so he's using his negative qualities of destruction through the positive quality of self-sacrifice that he's got and that he learned specifically from the hermit in the woods. So you've got all that going on. Overall, what I just want to say about it, to just kind of sum up, is that Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein tell a story about the nurturing of a child in some ways. A child is born with both good and evil qualities, inherently flawed, but also having some inherent worth and goodness, imbued with a spirit. And through the negative interactions that child has experienced, it will ultimately end in destruction. So the ultimate sort of message from this point of view of Frankenstein seems to be that if you are going to create, if you're going to have a child, raise it up right, raise it up with love, use the goodness that's already inside of you and love others so that others can, so that that person that you're trying to raise up, that you're trying to make good, is going to be positive to society and not create destruction. This has been my TED Talk. No. But anyway, yeah, really long discussion. I don't know if this is even a good video. I don't know who this video is for, but I just wanted to talk. You know, this is kind of a weird Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein vlog style kind of video. It's been long. I am tired. I'm going to sip a little bit of coffee. There's been a lot of technical issues. I'm going to post what I can. I may have to break it up into two. So, rock on. If you like, subscribe. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching. If you watched through the entire video, congratulations. Bye-bye.